The hand holds stone, turning it slowly in morning light. Just a river cobble, smooth and cold. But someone, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at a similar stone and saw something invisible to every other species on Earth. Not just what it was, but what it could become. A tool, a cutting edge, a solution waiting inside solid rock. This was the cognitive threshold that changed everything. Not strength or speed or natural weapons, but the capacity to recognize potential in raw material and transform it through technique. The ability to see that certain stones fracture predictably while others crumble uselessly. The patience to practice for months before producing a single functional tool. The insight that innovations could accumulate across generations, each improvement building on the last. How did simple stone breaking evolve into sophisticated technology? How did humans progress from accidentally creating sharp flakes to deliberately engineering composite tools requiring adhesive chemistry, thermal treatment, pressure flaking mastery, and 10 years of practice to perfect? Tonight's story answers that question through the patient accumulation of knowledge across 300,000 years. We'll discover how flint and obsidian fracture differently, requiring different techniques. We'll watch percussion methods evolve from basic striking to refined soft hammer control. We'll see pressure flaking emerge, demanding years to master, but enabling razor-sharp edges impossible through percussion alone. We'll observe hafting innovations combining stone, wood, and birch tar, heated precisely to 700 degrees. We'll trace heat treatment discoveries improving stone workability by 40%. We'll follow blade technology, maximizing cutting edge from each piece of raw material. We'll understand how tools began making better tools, creating self-reinforcing technological advancement. We'll witness specialization producing scrapers and burins and projectile points, each optimized for specific tasks. We'll track teaching systems transmitting complex knowledge because expertise this deep couldn't be discovered individually. We'll see skill development timelines showing that basic competence required a year while mastery demanded 15. This isn't a story about primitive simplicity, it's about hidden sophistication, knowledge compressed into techniques requiring a decade to learn. Cognitive breakthroughs, recognizing invisible material properties. Manual dexterity refined through thousands of practice attempts. Cultural transmission, enabling cumulative progress where each generation built on previous discoveries rather than starting over. The fundamental reality that small improvements accumulated across hundreds of generations transformed simple flaking into craft sophisticated enough to eventually enable all human technology. If you drift off before the story ends, that's perfect. These words are here to carry you gently toward rest. If you find comfort here, consider subscribing so there's always another story waiting. And if you'd like to support this work, there's a link below. For now, though, just settle in. Get comfortable. Let the modern world fade. We're going back to the moment when stone became more than stone, when observation turned into technique and technique accumulated into expertise, when teachers invested years training students and students refined what they'd learned and passed it forward. And we're discovering together how humans became technological not through sudden genius, but through patient accumulation of practical knowledge across 10,000 generations. One small innovation building on another, until simple fractured stones became the foundation for everything humans would eventually create. Hands turned stone slowly in morning light, feeling weight and balance, fingers running across surface texture where the rock curves smooth in some places and shows angular breaks in others, and this simple act of holding stone and examining it represents a cognitive threshold that separates humans from nearly every other species, because recognizing that certain rocks possess internal properties, making them fracture in predictable ways when struck, while other seemingly similar rocks simply crumble or shatter irregularly without producing useful edges, requires seeing beyond immediate appearance into hidden potential, understanding that what looks like simple stone actually contains the possibility of transformation through deliberate action. The recognition begins with observation across many attempts, many seasons, many lifetimes of experimentation where someone strikes two rocks together. And sometimes, only sometimes, a sharp flake detaches with an edge that slices through hide or meat more easily than any tooth or fingernail could manage. And this occasional success, amid many failures, gradually builds understanding that particular stone types, specifically those with very fine crystalline structures, where microscopic mineral grains pack tightly together without large irregular crystals or soft porous areas, break in ways that create sustained sharp edges along predictable curves rather than random jagged fragments. Flint represents one such material, formed over millions of years as dissolved silica precipitates within limestone deposits, creating dense glassy stone that fractures following what geologists term conchoidal patterns, meaning the break propagates in expanding cone shapes through the material, producing curved shell-like surfaces where the stone separates, and along these curves run edges sharp enough to cut at cellular level, slicing through plant fiber and animal tissue with remarkable efficiency. Someone picks up flint cobble from riverbed, feeling the cold, smooth weight, noticing how light reflects differently from this stone compared to the granite or sandstone nearby, and something in past experience, knowledge passed from those who came before, triggers recognition that this particular rock can become tool, that inside this oval shape hide dozens of potential cutting edges waiting to be revealed through proper striking. And this recognition represents profound intellectual achievement because it requires holding two concepts simultaneously: what the stone is now in its natural state and what the stone could become through human action, visualizing future form within present material. The understanding extends to other materials too, learned through generations of trial, where obsidian, volcanic glass formed when lava cools so rapidly that crystals cannot organize, produces edges even sharper than flint, capable of cuts so clean they leave less scarring than modern surgical steel, though obsidian's extreme brittleness means edges chip easily and tools break under heavy use, making this material precious for precise cutting but less suitable for rough work. Chert, similar to flint but formed through different geological processes, offers intermediate properties with good edge quality and somewhat better resistance to breaking, while quartzite, metamorphosed sandstone found widely across many landscapes, provides edges of lower quality but can be worked adequately when better materials remain unavailable. And this knowledge of material properties, this understanding that different rocks possess different characteristics requiring different applications, accumulates across thousands of generations, where each discovery builds on previous understanding. Each failed attempt teaches something about what doesn't work. Each successful tool demonstrates what does. The cognitive leap involved in recognizing fracture potential goes deeper than simple pattern recognition, because it requires understanding causation, the invisible relationship between force applied and result produced, grasping that striking stone at particular angle with particular force will cause predictable break pattern to propagate through material even though the fracture mechanism itself remains invisible, hidden inside the rock where no eye can see the crack, spreading along crystalline boundaries and stress planes. This causal reasoning, this ability to predict invisible processes and plan actions based on anticipated outcomes, represents mental capacity that took millions of years to evolve. Neural architecture supporting abstract thought and forward planning that distinguishes human cognition from the more immediate stimulus response patterns characterizing most animal behavior. A crow might use stick to extract insect from hole, responding to immediate problem with immediate tool, but recognizing that particular stone type will fracture predictably when struck, then seeking out that specific stone type in landscape, then carrying it back to camp for future use, then systematically striking it to produce multiple cutting edges for tasks not yet encountered, requires mental time travel, the ability to imagine future needs and prepare for them through present actions. Cognitive capacity that appears uniquely developed in human lineage. The recognition also demands spatial reasoning, ability to read three-dimensional form and predict how two-dimensional surface features indicate internal structure and potential fracture planes, seeing ridges and platforms on stone's exterior as indicators of where productive strikes might land. Understanding that certain angles between striking platform and stone's main body will produce long, useful flakes, while other angles create only small fragments or cause stone to shatter. And this spatial intelligence develops through practice but requires underlying cognitive architecture capable of manipulating mental models of physical objects, rotating them mentally, imagining hidden dimensions, predicting geometric outcomes of physical actions. Someone examines flint cobble, turning it slowly, fingers tracing across surface irregularities. An experienced eye sees not just exterior contours, but imagines internal structure, visualizes how force will propagate through material, identifies optimal striking points where platform angle and ridge configuration suggest that blow will detach flake of useful size and shape. And this visual imagination, this ability to see potential tool hidden within raw material, represents cognitive sophistication equal to any modern engineering visualization, perhaps more impressive because it operates without drawings or models, entirely within practitioner's mind developed through years of direct physical engagement with stone. The selection process itself shows accumulated knowledge, because finding appropriate tool stone requires recognizing it among countless other rocks scattered across landscape, distinguishing useful material from similar-looking but inferior alternatives. And this recognition happens quickly, almost automatically, for experienced individuals who can spot flint outcropping from distance or identify promising cobbles in riverbed gravel by slight differences in color, texture, weathering patterns, even sound when struck lightly, characteristics that mark fine-grained, fracturable stone, distinct from coarser materials unsuitable for tool-making. The knowledge includes understanding where different stone types occur in landscape, which riverbeds carry flint cobbles washed down from limestone deposits upstream, which hillsides expose chert layers in eroded outcrops, which volcanic regions provide obsidian sources, and this geographical knowledge combines with material recognition to create systematic procurement strategies where groups travel specifically to known stone sources, sometimes covering significant distances to obtain high-quality material, then transport it back to living areas for future use, planning and effort investment, demonstrating that tool-making isn't opportunistic activity, using whatever happens to be immediately available, but rather deliberate, systematic practice requiring advanced preparation and resource management. Collections of unworked flint cobbles found at archaeological sites far from natural sources show this procurement planning. Stones carried dozens or hundreds of miles because their fracture properties make the transport effort worthwhile. And these caches of raw material represent not just stones but accumulated geographical knowledge, understanding of landscape resources, ability to plan for future needs, all cognitive capacities supporting the simple recognition that certain stones break just right. The first attempts produce nothing but frustration and broken fragments, because striking stone against stone seems simple enough in concept, but execution requires coordination developing only through patient repetition, where failure teaches as much as success, perhaps more, building intuitive understanding of angles and forces that eventually becomes almost automatic, but initially feels impossibly difficult. Someone picks up dense river cobble, hammerstone selected for its hardness and comfortable grip size, holds flint core in other hand, bracing it against thigh or ground, raises hammerstone and brings it down against flint's surface, and the impact produces sharp crack sound, but removes only tiny chip, or causes nothing to happen at all because angle was slightly wrong or force insufficient or platform preparation inadequate. And this failure, repeated dozens of times in early learning, gradually teaches what doesn't work, building negative knowledge that narrows possibilities toward eventual success. The hammerstone must be hard enough to deliver impact without crumbling itself, typically quartzite or granite selected for density and toughness, but not so hard that it shatters the core stone. And weight matters too, because hammerstone must be heavy enough that its mass contributes to impact force, but light enough for controlled swinging, usually fist-sized or slightly larger, smooth enough that grip remains secure through repeated striking, but not so polished that it slips from sweaty palm during work. Selecting proper hammerstone represents first decision in tool-making process, choice influencing everything that follows, and experienced knappers develop preferences for particular hammerstone types and shapes, knowing from hundreds of hours of practice which tools feel right in hand and deliver force most effectively. The striking motion itself requires more precision than appears obvious, because simply bashing stones together produces mostly unusable results, while controlled strike removing desirable flake demands specific technique where hammerstone approaches striking platform at angle between 70 and 90 degrees to platform surface, delivering impact that propagates into stone at angle, directing force along desired fracture path, rather than straight into material where it dissipates without productive result. The platform, that surface area where hammerstone contacts stone, must be prepared properly, meaning previous flake removal or natural break has created relatively flat surface oriented at productive angle to stone's main mass, and recognizing good platforms, identifying where they exist on core stone, or understanding how to create them through careful preliminary flaking, represents crucial skill developing through experience. Someone learning the technique might strike anywhere on stone's surface, hoping for success, but seasoned napper reads the stone, turning it slowly, examining surfaces, identifying ridge lines where previous flakes terminated and created new platforms, visualizing how these platforms relate to stone's internal structure, selecting striking point based on accumulated understanding of geometry and fracture mechanics, then executing strike with controlled force and precise angle, and this selection process happening in seconds before each strike represents condensed application of knowledge acquired through months or years of practice and teaching. The force level matters enormously. Too much and coarse stone shatters into useless fragments. Too little and strike either bounces off without removing flake or detaches only tiny chip insufficient for useful edge. And learning proper force requires building muscle memory through repetition, where hand and arm and shoulder learn to coordinate, delivering precisely calibrated impact. Not too hard, not too soft. Just sufficient force focused at correct angle to propagate fracture through stone, removing flake of desired size. The sound provides feedback. Experienced knappers can hear in the impact crack whether strike will produce good flake or failed attempt, learning to distinguish dull thud indicating force absorbed without productive fracture from sharper ringing crack suggesting clean flake detachment. And this auditory feedback adds another dimension to learning process, where not just visual and tactile senses, but hearing too contributes to developing skill. The feel matters also. Sensation transmitted through hammerstone into striking hand carries information about impact quality, whether force transferred efficiently into core or dissipated at surface, whether fracture initiated properly or stone resisted breaking. Subtle tactile cues that become readable with experience though remaining largely unconscious. Information processed by neural pathways handling motor control rather than brought to conscious awareness. Body learning through repetition. What mind cannot easily articulate in words. The positioning requires attention too, how core stone is supported during striking influences, whether force propagates productively or whether stone simply moves away from impact, absorbing force through displacement rather than through fracture. And knappers develop various support techniques, holding core stone against thigh where leg muscles provide resistance, bracing it against ground or supporting log, supporting it in palm of hand with fingers curled around to stabilize it, each method offering different control characteristics and suited to different flaking tasks. The first few months of practice, assuming someone attempts knapping regularly rather than occasionally, produce mostly failures, broken cores, and irregular fragments, and perhaps one usable flake in every 10 or 20 attempts. Success rate so low it seems discouraging, except that each failure teaches something, builds slightly better understanding of technique, incrementally improves coordination and force control and angle judgment. 6 months of regular practice might bring success rate up to one good flake in 5 attempts. Noticeable improvement, but still producing much waste material relative to usable output. And archaeological sites preserve this learning process in debris patterns where practiced eye can distinguish clumsy, early attempts from more skilled work. Seeing in flake scars and platform remnants the signature of developing competence. Reading in broken stone the story of someone learning, making mistakes, gradually improving. 1 year into learning, assuming continued practice and ideally guidance from experienced teacher who can correct errors and demonstrate proper technique, produces functional competence where learner can reliably create simple cutting tools, can identify good striking platforms with reasonable accuracy, can control force well enough that most attempts remove flakes rather than breaking core, though the tools still lack refinement, still show inefficient use of stone, still require more time than expert would need, perhaps 30 minutes to produce what skilled knapper accomplishes in 10. 2 years brings noticeable improvement where tools begin showing intentional form rather than just opportunistic shaping, where flake removals follow planned sequences creating deliberate edge configurations, where stone use becomes more economical with less waste. Though true refinement, the ability to produce thin, sharp implements with efficient use of every strike, typically requires 3 to 5 years of sustained practice, and reaching mastery level where virtually every strike removes optimal flake and finish tools, match the finest archaeological specimens typically demands 10 to 15 years of dedicated work, explaining why in ancient populations tool-making expertise probably concentrated among relatively few individuals who invested the decades required for mastery, while most people possessed basic functional skills sufficient for everyday needs without approaching expert capability. And this distribution of skill levels visible in archaeological record shows that tool-making wasn't simple instinctive behavior, but rather complex technical practice requiring extensive learning and practice, making it cultural knowledge transmitted through teaching rather than biological instinct emerging automatically. The search for stone leads across landscapes where different geological processes have created different materials with properties revealing themselves only through use, through systematic trial over generations, where success and failure with various rock types gradually builds collective knowledge about which materials serve tool-making best and which prove disappointing despite initial promise. Flint, that dense silica-rich stone forming within limestone deposits, emerges as premier tool-making material across many regions, valued because its extremely fine crystalline structure creates fracture patterns so consistent and predictable that skilled knappers can remove flakes with remarkable precision, producing edges sharp enough to slice cleanly through tough hide or sever tough plant fibers, edges remaining sharp through extended use before dulling requires resharpening, though even then flint tools can be resharpened repeatedly by removing small flakes along edge, extending useful life considerably. The material's durability means flint tools survive in archaeological record, preserving details of their manufacture, allowing modern researchers to study ancient techniques, but more importantly, to ancient users, flint's qualities meant tools performed reliably. Crucial advantage when tool failure might mean lost game or unsuccessful hide processing or inability to complete necessary tasks. And this reliability made high-quality flint valuable enough that people transported it considerable distances, sometimes 50 miles or more from source outcrops to living sites, effort investment demonstrating materials' worth. Obsidian offers different qualities. Volcanic glass formed when lava cools so rapidly that mineral crystals cannot organize, leaving material with molecular structure more similar to manufactured glass than crystalline rock. And this structure produces edges sharper than any other naturally occurring material, sharper even than modern surgical steel, cutting at cellular level with such clean slices that tissue damage remains minimal, and healing happens faster than with rougher cuts. Qualities making obsidian precious for precision work, delicate cutting tasks, projectile points where sharpness determines penetration depth and hunting success. The brittleness proves problematic, though. Edges chip easily under rough use or lateral stress, points snap if they strike bone, tools break if dropped or handled carelessly, disadvantages limiting obsidian's usefulness for heavy-duty tasks like chopping or scraping, relegating it to specialized applications where extreme sharpness matters more than durability, and the regional scarcity adds another limitation. Because obsidian forms only in volcanic areas, meaning most populations lack local access, must obtain it through trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. In some cases, archaeological evidence of long-distance obsidian transport revealing exchange systems operating across vast territories, people willing to invest significant effort acquiring this precious material despite its limitations, because for certain applications, nothing else performs as well. Chert provides intermediate option, similar to flint in many respects, but formed through different geological processes, sometimes occurring in sedimentary deposits, sometimes in limestone layers, sometimes as nodules within other rock formations, and quality varies considerably depending on formation conditions. Some chert approaching flint's excellence, while other chert contains impurities or irregular grain structures, reducing its fracture predictability, meaning successful use requires evaluating each piece individually rather than assuming all chert performs identically. The advantage lies in wider availability compared to high-grade flint, many landscapes providing adequate chert where premium flint remains scarce, and this accessibility makes chert important despite quality variations. Practical material for everyday tools where perfection matters less than functionality. Reliable enough for most cutting and scraping tasks, though perhaps not ideal for finest work requiring ultimate precision and sharpness. Learning to evaluate chert quality, distinguishing superior material from inferior alternatives, represents important skill where examination of color, grain texture, presence of inclusions, sound when struck lightly, even smell when freshly broken, all provide clues about likely fracture behavior, and experienced knappers develop almost intuitive sense for material quality, picking through pile of chert nodules and quickly identifying pieces worth working while rejecting unpromising candidates. Discrimination ability developed through handling countless stones and noting which performed well and which disappointed. Quartzite serves where better materials remain unavailable. Metamorphosed sandstone, common across many landscapes, formed when sandstone undergoes heat and pressure, reorganizing quartz grains into more tightly interlocked structure, creating rock harder than original sandstone and capable of producing functional cutting edges, though quality falls below flint or chert. Edges duller, fracture patterns less predictable, more force required to remove flakes. Finished tools less refined, but adequate functionality for basic tasks when alternatives don't exist. The widespread availability makes quartzite important in regions lacking finer materials, and archaeological sites in areas without local flint or chert deposits show heavy reliance on quartzite tools, evidence that ancient people used what landscape provided, making do with available resources and developing techniques for working less ideal materials. Practical adaptability, ensuring tool making continued regardless of local geology. Some populations develop specialized techniques for working quartzite's more difficult fracture properties, using heat treatment or particular striking methods, compensating for material limitations. Innovations showing how technical knowledge can partially overcome material constraints, though even with refined technique, quartzite never quite matches flint's ease of working or edge quality. Basalt and other igneous rocks sometimes serve tool making where volcanic activity has created fine-grained materials. Cooled lava forming dense rock with relatively small crystal structure, allowing controlled flaking, though generally coarser grained than flint, making edges less sharp and fracture less predictable, but still workable and widely available in volcanic regions where it provides practical alternative to scarcer materials, and archaeological records from volcanic areas show sophisticated basalt tool-making traditions developing specialized techniques suited to materials' particular properties. The variation in rock properties, this diversity of materials with different characteristics, means tool makers must understand not just general flaking principles, but specific behaviors of each stone type, must adjust technique based on material being worked, applying more force for tougher stone, using different striking angles for materials with different fracture properties, selecting appropriate hammer stones matched to core stone's hardness, and this material-specific knowledge accumulates through experience and teaching, each stone type requiring its own learning process, own body of practical wisdom about how to work it effectively, making tool-making knowledge more complex than single uniform technique, instead representing flexible expertise capable of adapting to whatever materials landscape provides. understanding that tools can be made from various rocks, but each demands its own approach, and mastering this material diversity requires years of varied practice working different stone types, gradually building mental library of material properties and appropriate techniques. Knowledge that makes successful tool-making possible across diverse geological settings rather than limiting it to regions blessed with ideal materials. The shift from stone hammers to softer organic hammers represents subtle innovation with profound effects on tool-making capability. Change in striking tool material, enabling much finer control over flake removal and producing thinner, more refined implements than stone-on-stone percussion typically achieves, and this technical advance emerging with Homo sapiens sophistication shows how small modifications in technique can unlock significant improvements in tool quality, opening possibilities for more complex and specialized tool forms. The principle seems almost counterintuitive at first consideration. Using softer hammer should produce less effective results since it delivers less rigid impact, but actual practice reveals that softer hammers made from antler, bone, or dense hardwood create different impact characteristics than stone hammers, differences that experienced knappers can exploit for refined work where stone hammers prove too aggressive. And understanding why softer hammers enable better control requires examining the physics of impact and how force transfers from hammer to core stone. Stone hammerstone delivers very hard, rigid impact, where force concentrates at precise contact point, transferring almost instantaneously. And this concentrated forceful impact works well for removing large flakes, for roughing out tool form, for initial reduction of core stone into manageable size, but for refining edges, for removing thin flakes that shape final tool form without removing excessive material, for creating elegant tool proportions with controlled edge angles. The hard percussion often proves too powerful, removing more material than intended or causing flakes to terminate prematurely, creating step fractures that interrupt edge continuity. Antler hammers, made from deer or elk antler sections, provide different impact quality because antler structure, dense on exterior but somewhat porous internally, compresses slightly during impact, spreading force over marginally longer time period and slightly larger contact area. Differences measured in milliseconds and millimeters, but producing noticeably different results in flake removal. And these subtle differences allow knapper to remove thinner flakes with more controlled terminations, flakes that feather out gradually at their edges rather than ending abruptly, creating smoother tool surfaces and more refined edge configurations. The antler's slight elasticity means it bounces less than stone hammer, reducing tendency for hammer to skip or ricochet off striking platform, improving strike accuracy and reliability. And the softer material also damages striking platforms less than stone, preserving them for multiple flake removals where stone hammer might crush platform edge, making subsequent striking difficult. Practical advantage that becomes important during extensive tool shaping sequences requiring numerous precisely placed strikes. Learning to use antler hammers effectively requires recalibrating force and angle judgments developed during stone hammer practice. Because the softer impact demands different striking technique, often more direct perpendicular approach to platform rather than glancing angle used with stone, and force levels must be adjusted since antler requires somewhat firmer strikes to achieve same flake removal that lighter stone hammer blow produces, adjustments requiring practice and developing distinct muscle memory separate motor learning for different hammer types. Bone hammers made from large mammal long bones offer properties between antler and stone, harder than antler but still softer than stone hammerstone, and their solid, dense structure provides impact characteristics useful for intermediate stage work. Transition between initial rough flaking and final refinement, situations where stone hammer removes too much material but antler hammer proves too soft, and skilled knappers often use multiple hammer types in sequence, beginning with stone for primary shaping, switching to bone for secondary thinning, finishing with antler for final edge refinement. Tool-making progression, showing sophisticated understanding of how different tools serve different purposes. Knowledge that accumulates through experimentation, discovering that tool-making itself benefits from specialized tools, that the process of creating tools can be refined through thoughtful equipment selection. Hardwood hammers, made from dense wood species like oak or maple, function similarly to antler with slightly different impact feel, wood's cellular structure providing cushioned blow that spreads force temporally, and some knappers prefer wood hammers for certain applications. Personal preference developing through experience where individual workers discover which materials feel most natural in their hands, which provide feedback sensations most readable to their sensory systems, subtle variations in technique and preference, showing that tool-making possesses artistic dimension alongside technical requirements, room for individual style and approach within broader framework of effective practice. The introduction of soft hammer percussion, this technical innovation enabling more refined tools, illustrates how tool-making knowledge evolves through experimentation and accumulated discovery. Because someone at some point, impossible to identify who or when, tried using something other than stone hammerstone. Perhaps initially by accident when appropriate stone wasn't immediately available, perhaps through deliberate experimentation seeking better control, and discovered that softer hammer provided advantages for certain applications, and this discovery got transmitted through teaching and imitation, spreading through populations and across generations, until soft hammer technique became standard practice for refined work. Innovation pathway, demonstrating that technological progress happens through practical exploration, where people try alternatives, evaluate results, retain improvements, and pass successful innovations to others. Cultural transmission, enabling beneficial discoveries to spread and persist. And this process, repeated countless times for countless innovations, drives technological evolution from simple to complex, from basic to refined, from adequate to excellent, showing how human tool-making advanced not through sudden revolutionary breakthroughs, but through patient incremental improvement, where each generation inherited previous generations' knowledge and added its own small refinements and discoveries, creating over thousands of generations the sophisticated tool-making traditions visible in archaeological record. Traditions embodying accumulated wisdom of countless nameless innovators and teachers who collectively transformed simple stone breaking into refined technical practice. The soft hammer innovation also reveals cognitive capacity for recognizing abstract principles and transferring them across different situations. Because understanding that softer hammer enables finer control requires grasping causal relationship between hammer material properties and flake removal characteristics. Seeing connection between cause and effect that isn't immediately obvious, then deliberately selecting tool based on desired outcome. Choosing softer hammer when wanting to remove thin flake, and choosing harder hammer when wanting to remove thicker flake. Intentional tool selection based on predicted results, representing forward planning and causal reasoning. Mental capabilities that underlie all sophisticated tool making and separate human technical abilities from the simpler tool use observed in other species, where tool selection tends toward opportunistic availability rather than deliberate matching of tool properties to task requirements, and this ability to analyze techniques, identify improvements, select tools strategically, and transmit innovations socially, creates foundation for cumulative technological progress, where improvements accumulate across generations rather than each generation starting anew from basic principles. Cultural ratchet effect, enabling human technology to advance beyond what any individual could discover in single lifetime, making human tool-making a fundamentally social enterprise dependent on knowledge transmission between experienced and novice practitioners, between generations, between populations, creating shared technical traditions that characterize human cultures and enable the spectacular technological progression that eventually transformed simple flaked stones into all the complex tools and machines characterizing modern civilization. The shift from percussion to pressure, from striking stone to pressing it, opens entirely new realm of control in tool making, where removal of tiny flakes through applied pressure rather than impact enables refinement impossible through percussion alone, and mastering pressure flaking technique requires years of dedicated practice, developing precise control and subtle strength in hands and arms, along with almost intuitive understanding of stone fracture mechanics operating at minute scale, where errors measured in millimeters determine success or failure. The pressure flaking tool, typically pointed implement made from antler tine, bone section, or sometimes copper for softest stones, transmits force gradually rather than instantaneously, pressed firmly against stone edge while increasing pressure steadily until fracture initiates removing small flake. And this gradual force application provides control unavailable with percussion, where impact happens too quickly for adjustment. Pressure method, allowing napper to feel stone's resistance, sense when fracture begins, modulate force during flake removal, responding to feedback in real time. Capabilities enabling precision work, shaping refined edges and creating detailed tool forms with controlled symmetry and elegant proportions. The technique demands considerable hand strength and endurance because pressure adequate to remove flakes, typically force equivalent to pressing hard against resistant surface, must be maintained steadily while carefully positioning tool point, and sustained pressure flaking session leaves, hands aching and muscles fatigued. Physical demands, meaning that developing technique requires not just learning proper positioning and force application, but also building specific muscle strength and endurance in hands, forearms, shoulders, physical conditioning that happens gradually through regular practice, body adapting to activity's demands just as coordination improves through repetition. Learning pressure flaking typically begins after napper has achieved competence with percussion techniques, because pressure flaking serves final refinement of tools already shaped through percussion, adding last details, perfecting edges, removing small irregularities, finishing work, requiring foundation of percussion-made pre-form, and attempting pressure flaking. Without adequate percussion preparation, usually produces frustration because pressure technique cannot remove large amounts of material, cannot reshape poorly formed tools, can only refine forms already close to desired final configuration. The first attempts at pressure flaking typically fail completely. Tool pressed hard against stone edge produces no result. Stone resists fracturing. Pressure flaking tool slips off edge. Napper's hands tire quickly without achieving flake removal, discouraging initial experience that requires patient persistence because successful pressure flaking demands finding precise combination of tool positioning, pressure angle, force level, and stone edge preparation, variables that must all align correctly before flakes begin detaching. And discovering this correct combination happens through trial and error, where countless failed attempts gradually narrow possibilities until eventually, often after weeks of frustrating practice, first pressure flake detaches, small thin fragment popping off edge, success that feels dramatic after so many failures. Though the resulting flake is tiny, almost insignificant, yet represents breakthrough showing technique works, confirming that continued practice might eventually develop capability. The edge preparation matters enormously because pressure flaking requires that stone edge be properly shaped and angled to accept pressure tool's force and allow fracture to initiate and propagate. Edges that are too thick resist pressure fracturing. Edges that are too thin crumble rather than flaking cleanly. Edge angles too obtuse prevent flakes from detaching. Edge angles too acute cause edge to crush rather than flake. And learning to recognize proper edge configuration to prepare edges through careful percussion work before attempting pressure flaking represents essential preliminary skill, foundation that must be established before pressure technique becomes possible. And this preparation stage, creating edge forms suitable for pressure finishing, requires sophisticated percussion technique in itself. Ability to produce thin, regular edges through controlled percussion flaking, skills that might take a year or two to develop adequately, meaning pressure flaking builds on substantial percussion expertise rather than representing beginner technique. Explaining why learning sequence typically progresses from basic percussion competence taking 6 to 12 months through refined percussion skill requiring 1 to 2 years. Finally to pressure flaking capability, developing during third year of practice or later, assuming regular practice and ideally guidance from experienced teacher who can demonstrate proper technique and correct errors that learner cannot identify independently. The pressure tool positioning requires precision difficult to appreciate without attempting the technique, because pressure flaking tool must contact stone edge at very specific angle relative to edge surface and must be positioned precisely on edge platform where force will propagate productively into stone. And these requirements demand steady hands, precise control, ability to maintain exact positioning while gradually increasing pressure, coordination, developing through practice, but requiring fine motor control exceeding what many people realize they possess until training develops latent capabilities. The force application follows careful sequence where pressure begins gentle, gradually increases, while napper monitors stone's response, watching for micro movement indicating fracture initiation, feeling for subtle changes in resistance suggesting flake beginning to separate, maintaining pressure through flake removal until thin flake pops free, entire sequence taking perhaps 2 to 5 seconds of sustained controlled pressure, and performing this sequence successfully once feels gratifying, but performing it repeatedly, removing series of tiny flakes that progressively refine tool edge, requires stamina and concentration. Session of serious pressure flaking work, demanding perhaps hour of focused effort, producing dozens or hundreds of small flake removals, each requiring same careful control, same precise positioning, same sustained pressure, repetitive action that challenges endurance and attention, making successful pressure flaking session represent not just technical achievement, but also physical and mental endurance test. The results justify the effort, though, because pressure-flaked tools achieve edge refinement and overall form quality. Impossible through percussion alone, edges becoming thin and sharp and even, tool surfaces showing regular controlled flake scars, creating almost rippled appearance, symmetry, and proportion, reaching levels approaching aesthetic perfection alongside functional excellence. and these refined tools cut more efficiently, penetrate deeper when used as projectile points, last longer before dulling, represent pinnacle of stone tool-making craft, embodying hundreds or thousands of hours of practice and learning compressed into final form, where every flake scar shows skilled hand and every edge angle demonstrates mastery, and archaeological specimens showing finest pressure flaking work reveal that ancient craftspeople achieved remarkable sophistication in stoneworking, produced tools that modern experimental archaeologists struggle to replicate even after years of practice, demonstrating that ancient expertise sometimes exceeded modern understanding, that knowledge accumulated across generations and invested in dedicated practitioners created capabilities we struggle to recover. Humbling reminder that technological progress isn't linear improvement, but rather rises and falls depending on cultural transmission and practice investment. And ancient tool makers who devoted decades to mastering their craft achieved proficiency that might never be fully recovered, because modern world lacks both the necessity that drove such focused expertise and the lifetime practice investment that created it, making pressure-flaked stone tools artifacts that preserve in their perfection the echo of skills that required 2 to 3 years dedicated practice for basic competence and 10 to 15 years for true mastery, showing that even seemingly simple stone tools embody profound accumulated knowledge and refined technique, taking human working life to perfect. The breakthrough comes not from better stone working alone, but from recognizing that tool need not be single unified piece, that combining different materials into assembled implement creates capabilities exceeding what any single material provides, and this conceptual shift from monolithic tools to composite construction represents profound cognitive advance, requiring ability to envision tool as system of interacting components rather than indivisible object. Mental capacity, enabling not just hafted stone tools, but eventually all complex technology built from multiple parts working together. The simplest hafted tool consists of sharp stone point attached to wooden shaft, creating spear or knife, where stone provides cutting edge, while wood provides handle, length, leverage, each material contributing properties suited to its function. And this division of labor between materials, stone for sharpness and wood for structure, allows tool to perform better than either material could alone. Stone point without handle difficult to grip and use effectively. Wooden shaft without stone point lacking penetrating power needed for hunting or butchering. But combined, they create effective implement multiplying human capabilities. The attachment problem seems straightforward conceptually. Affix stone to wood securely enough that it doesn't detach during use. But practical execution reveals significant technical challenges because stone and wood have different surface properties. Stone smooth and hard, resisting adhesion, wood fibrous and somewhat flexible, creating movement that works against fixed bonds, and simply tying point to shaft with cordage or plant fiber strips proves inadequate for many applications because binding alone allows too much movement. Point can shift or rotate or pull free under stress of use, failures that render tool unreliable or dangerous. The solution emerges through discovering adhesives, sticky substances that bond materials together more securely than cordage alone achieves, and identifying suitable adhesive materials requires extensive experimentation and accumulated knowledge about plant resins, tree saps, animal products, and their properties under different conditions. Knowledge built across generations of trial, where some substances prove disappointingly weak or brittle, while others provide robust, lasting bonds surviving heavy use. Birch bark tar represents one highly effective adhesive, produced by heating birch bark in low oxygen environment, process that drives off volatile compounds, leaving behind black sticky tar that remains pliable when warm but hardens when cool, creating strong adhesive bond between stone and wood, and producing birch tar requires sophisticated understanding of thermal processing because temperature must reach approximately 650 to 750 degrees to initiate tar formation, but cannot exceed these levels significantly, or bark simply burns without producing tar and maintaining appropriate temperature for extended period. Typically 5 to 8 hours of controlled heating demands careful fire management and probably specialized heating structures, perhaps buried containers or covered pits where bark can heat slowly without direct flame contact. Techniques that require experimentation to discover and careful execution to perform successfully. The knowledge that birch bark, when heated properly, produces useful tar, that heating must be controlled within specific temperature range. That process requires hours of maintained heat. That resulting tar works effectively as adhesive. That it can be reheated for application and hardens upon cooling represents substantial accumulated technical understanding that could not be discovered casually, but required dedicated experimentation and systematic observation of results. And archaeological evidence of birch tar production going back hundreds of thousands of years shows that ancient people invested this experimental effort and successfully developed reliable adhesive production methods. Pine resin provides alternative adhesive requiring different processing, collected as sticky sap from pine trees and used directly or mixed with other materials to modify properties. Pure resin often too brittle when hardened, but when mixed with charcoal powder or beeswax or ground plant fibers achieves better flexibility and durability and learning optimal mixture ratios. Discovering which additives improve performance and which prove unhelpful requires systematic experimentation, comparing different formulations and evaluating their effectiveness under actual use conditions. Testing that takes time and consumes materials but gradually builds knowledge of what works. And this experimental process, trying variations and assessing results and retaining successful innovations while abandoning failures, exemplifies how technical knowledge advances through practical investigation rather than theoretical deduction. Ancient toolmakers serving as practical engineers, solving problems through hands-on experimentation, guided by experience and observation. Animal glues derived from heating hides, bones, or sinew in water provide yet another adhesive option. Collagen proteins breaking down during heating and reorganizing when mixture cools, creating sticky substance that bonds materials effectively, though animal glues typically require more complex preparation than plant-based adhesives and may perform less reliably under wet conditions where they can soften or dissolve, limitations that make them more suitable for some applications than others. And knowing when to use which adhesive type, selecting birch tar for spear points that might get wet, choosing pine resin for knife hafts that remain dry, using animal glue for applications requiring easy disassembly for repair, represents practical wisdom accumulated through experience comparing different adhesives' performance across varied use situations. The hafting process itself requires careful execution. Stone point must be shaped with tang or notched base, providing attachment surface. Shaft must be split or hollowed at end to receive stone point. Adhesive must be prepared and applied while appropriately warm and soft. Point must be positioned correctly and held firmly while adhesive cools and hardens, often cordage or wet sinew wrapped tightly around joint, providing compression that reinforces adhesive bond. Sinew particularly effective because it shrinks as it dries, creating increasingly tight binding that strengthens over time, and entire assembly must be allowed to cure properly. Adhesive achieving full strength only after complete cooling or drying, rushed assembly producing weak joints that fail during use, patience during construction, directly affecting tool reliability. The result, when done properly, is remarkably durable tool that withstands heavy use. Point remains firmly attached through repeated impacts and cutting stresses. Adhesive joint distributing forces across broad attachment area, preventing concentration of stress that causes failures, and well-made hafted tools can be used extensively, resharpened multiple times as edge dulls, eventually replaced when point breaks or wears too short. But hafting components often retained and reused with new points. Efficient practice, maximizing utility of both stone and wooden components, showing resource-conscious approach, where materials are valued and conserved rather than casually discarded. Practical economy emerging from world where everything used must be made by hand and materials must be gathered or procured through travel or trade. The hafted tool's significance extends beyond improved functionality to cognitive implications, because creating composite tool requires ability to plan multiple steps ahead, envisioning final assembled tool while working on individual components, maintaining mental model of how parts will fit together while manufacturing each piece separately, then executing assembly sequence in proper order with appropriate techniques for each stage, hierarchical planning and sequential thinking showing mental organization capacity that distinguishes human cognition, ability to break complex tasks into ordered subtasks and execute them systematically, working toward envisioned goal. And this cognitive architecture supporting composite tool manufacture applies equally to other complex activities, from coordinated hunting strategies to social organization to eventually all technological and social complexity characterizing human societies, making hafted tools not just practical implements but also indicators of cognitive capabilities underlying all human cultural achievements, showing that minds capable of conceiving and executing composite tool construction possess mental equipment enabling all subsequent technological and cultural evolution. And the archaeological appearance of hafted tools marks threshold, where human technological capacity begins accelerating beyond what earlier simpler tool traditions achieved. Composite construction opening doors to increasing complexity, as understanding that tools can be built from multiple components gets applied to ever more sophisticated designs, combining more materials in more intricate arrangements, creating capabilities impossible for monolithic tools, technological trajectory leading eventually from stone point hafted to wooden shaft through countless innovations to all modern technology built from assembled components, making that first hafted spear point profound innovation that changed not just immediate hunting effectiveness, but initiated technological evolution pathway, continuing through present day. The discovery that heating stone alters its flaking properties represents remarkable insight into material science, understanding that thermal treatment changes internal structure in ways invisible to eye but dramatically apparent during knapping, and how ancient people discovered this effect remains mysterious, because the changes aren't obvious without attempting to work heat-treated versus untreated stone. Yet archaeological evidence shows deliberate heat treatment of tool stone extending back many thousands of years across multiple continents, suggesting either independent discovery in different regions or transmission of knowledge across vast distances, either scenario demonstrating that the innovation's value made it spread widely and persist across generations. The basic principle involves heating stone to temperatures between 350 and 450 degrees, maintaining this temperature for extended period, allowing heat to penetrate stone's interior, then allowing very slow controlled cooling that prevents thermal shock cracking. And when this heating cycle is executed properly, subtle changes occur in stone's crystalline structure. Water molecules trapped in microscopic spaces driven off, crystal boundaries slightly reorganizing, internal stresses relaxing. Alterations that make stone fracture more predictably and with less force required during subsequent flaking. Improvements measured at 30 to 50% easier flaking and smoother fracture surfaces. Substantial advantages that significantly improve tool-making efficiency and final tool quality. The temperature control poses considerable challenge because too little heat produces no beneficial effect, while excessive heat causes stone to crack or changes it in ways that actually worsen flaking properties, making the 350 to 450 degree range crucial, and achieving and maintaining these temperatures requires sophisticated fire management beyond simple campfire making, probably involving specialized heating structures or techniques. The heating process likely uses buried pit filled with hot coals, stones placed in pit and covered with more coals or hot sand, entire assemblage then covered with earth or hide to retain heat and exclude oxygen, preventing combustion. Arrangement creating oven-like environment where temperature can be controlled through amount of coals used and maintained steady for hours needed to heat-treat stone properly. And this pit heating method, reconstructed by experimental archaeologists attempting to replicate ancient heat treatment, requires considerable skill and experience because temperature cannot be measured directly, must be judged by indirect indicators like coal glow color or heat sensation near pit surface, imprecise methods demanding calibration through experience where repeated attempts teach what conditions produce successful treatment versus unsuccessful outcomes. The cooling must happen gradually. 2. Rapid cooling causing thermal shock that cracks stone, destroying entire piece and wasting effort invested in gathering material and executing heating process. So treated stones typically left buried in cooling pit overnight or longer, emerging only after complete return to ambient temperature. Patience during cooling phase is crucial as careful heating. And this slow treatment cycle, preparation taking hours, heating requiring half-day or full day of maintained temperature, cooling demanding day or more, means heat treatment represents substantial time and effort investment. Commitment that makes sense only because resulting improvement in workability provides sufficient benefit to justify the investment. Practical calculation where enhanced tool-making efficiency and improved final tool quality outweigh time and fuel costs of treatment process. The knowledge required to heat-treat stone successfully includes recognizing which stone types benefit from treatment, determining optimal temperatures for different materials, understanding how to construct and operate heating pit effectively, knowing appropriate heating duration and cooling protocols, identifying successfully treated versus unsuccessfully treated stone before beginning to work it. Comprehensive understanding built through experimentation and transmitted through teaching. Because while effects of heat treatment become obvious during knapping when treated, stone proves easier to work than untreated material. Recognizing that heating caused the improvement and determining what heating conditions produce, it requires systematic investigation, controlled comparisons where some stones are heated and others not, and results compared, variation in heating conditions to identify what works best. Accumulation of observations over multiple attempts, distinguishing effective protocols from ineffective ones. The experimental investment needed to develop this knowledge suggests either long development period where heat treatment understanding emerged gradually through accidental discoveries and incremental refinement, or possible single major insight by particularly observant individual who noticed that stones exposed to fire, perhaps accidentally heated during cooking or hearth construction, subsequently flaked more easily and recognized the causal connection and began deliberately heating stones to achieve the effect, either pathway requiring remarkable attention to detail and willingness to experiment systematically, intellectual curiosity, and practical problem-solving driving technological innovation. The archaeological evidence of heat treatment appears in multiple forms. Stones showing color changes characteristic of heating, reddening or darkening, or development of waxy luster, indicating thermal alteration. Flake scars with distinctive appearance showing fracture patterns typical of heat-treated material. Experimental archaeology demonstrating that archaeologists can learn to recognize heat-treated stone through visual examination and fracture characteristics, though confirmation often requires technical analysis, examining internal changes visible under microscopy or through other analytical methods. And sites showing evidence of heat treatment often contain concentrations of fire-cracked rock and altered stones, suggesting specialized heating areas, workshops where tool stone underwent preparation before being worked into finished implements. Spatial organization showing that heat treatment wasn't casual activity, but rather dedicated production stage occupying specific locations and requiring specialized knowledge and facilities. The geographic distribution of heat treatment appearing in Africa, Europe, Asia, suggesting either very ancient origin predating human dispersal from Africa or multiple independent discoveries in different regions. Whichever explanation applies, demonstrating that heat treatment represents relatively intuitive innovation once stoneworking reaches certain sophistication level, because connections between fire and material property changes would be observable in various contexts. Heated stones used in cooking showing altered fracture behavior. Stones near hearths accidentally heated showing easier working, providing clues that observant toolmakers might notice and investigate deliberately, turning accidental observations into systematic practice. The impact on tool-making efficiency and quality justifies the treatment investment, because heat-treated stone requires less force to flake, meaning reduced risk of striking errors that break cores, permits more controlled flaking, producing thinner, more refined implements, allows finer pressure. Flaking, removing smaller flakes, creating sharper, more regular edges. Improvements that elevate tool quality significantly while reducing material waste through better success rates and more efficient use of each piece of stone. Economic advantages that make heat treatment worthwhile despite time and effort requirements, and populations that developed heat treatment technology gained competitive advantage in tool-making efficiency, could produce more tools from available stone, could create higher quality implements with less effort, benefits that might translate to better hunting success, more effective hide processing, improved overall adaptation, advantages that could influence population success and expansion, making seemingly minor technical innovation potentially significant factor in human evolutionary and cultural history. Example of how technological advances, even incremental improvements rather than revolutionary breakthroughs, accumulate over time, creating substantial differences in adaptive capabilities, and heat treatment represents exactly this type of innovation. Not dramatic transformation, but significant refinement, modest advance that, when combined with countless other incremental improvements, drives overall technological progression, showing that human technological evolution proceeds primarily through steady accumulation of small innovations rather than rare dramatic inventions, patient building of knowledge and technique across generations, creating eventually the profound technological sophistication distinguishing human material culture. The blade technology represents systematic approach to stone tool production, where instead of creating individual flakes opportunistically, Napper prepares core stone carefully and then removes series of parallel-sided elongated flakes, each blade providing two sharp cutting edges running its length and several blades removed from single prepared core, production method that maximizes cutting-edge yield from available stone while producing standardized blanks that can be further modified into various specialized tool types. Efficiency innovation that shows sophisticated understanding of geometric principles and systematic production thinking. The core preparation requires considerable skill and planning because blade production works only when core possesses correct geometry, generally cylindrical or conical form with relatively flat top surface serving as striking platform and convex sides from which blades will be removed. Achieving this form demands careful preliminary shaping through percussion flaking that removes irregularities and creates proper curvature, essentially sculpting raw stone into blade core form before blade production can begin. Preparatory work representing significant investment that makes sense only because subsequent blade removal will produce multiple useful products. Delayed gratification requiring ability to work toward future payoff rather than seeking immediate results. Cognitive capacity for extended planning and willingness to invest effort in preparation, distinguishing blade technology from simpler flaking methods. The blade removal itself demands precise technique because successful blade detachment requires striking core's platform edge at exactly correct angle and force, blow directed slightly inward toward core's center and downward along core's side, impact propagating fracture that runs length of core removing blade that ideally features parallel sides, regular thickness, and length significantly exceeding width, proportions that maximize cutting edge relative to mass and create versatile blank suitable for various modifications. The platform must be carefully maintained between blade removals, each blade detachment creating new platform edge that must be prepared properly before next blade removal. Preparation involving removing small flake that creates fresh platform surface at proper angle. Maintenance work requiring almost as much skill as blade removal itself. And this alternating sequence of platform preparation and blade removal continues as long as core geometry remains suitable. Cores sometimes producing dozen or more blades before becoming too small or irregular for continued blade production. Productivity that justifies elaborate preparation and careful execution. Getting maximum utility from each piece of raw material through systematic exploitation rather than casual flaking. The success rate depends heavily on Napper's skill and core quality. Experienced practitioners achieving perhaps 70 to 80% successful blade removals, while learners might manage only 30 to 40%. Difference showing how much practice and judgment affects efficiency, and even successful blades show quality variations. Some long and regular and thin, while others prove shorter or thicker or more irregular, variations affecting their suitability for different applications. Finest blades reserved for tools requiring optimal properties, while lesser specimens used for less demanding purposes. The standardization blade production achieves represents important innovation because producing multiple similar blanks from single core creates efficiency in downstream tool manufacture. Blanks can be modified into various tool types using similar techniques. Tool makers can develop specialized skills at converting blades into particular tool forms, becoming efficient at manufacturing specific implement types from standardized starting forms, division of labor and specialization becoming possible in ways that general-purpose flaking doesn't support, and archaeological sites showing blade production often contain evidence of specialized tool manufacture. Workshops where blades got converted into specific tool types, spatial organization suggesting systematic production rather than casual tool making, approach to manufacture that anticipates later craft specialization, and organized production characterizing more recent human societies. The blade's geometric properties provide functional advantages beyond just maximizing cutting edge. Elongated form creates natural handle area at proximal end where blade was struck from core, leaving substantial portion available for gripping, while distal end provides cutting edge, convenient form factor requiring minimal modification for handheld use and for hafted applications. Blade's regular thickness and parallel sides facilitate attachment to handles or shafts. Predictable dimensions allowing standardized hafting methods. Technological system where production technique and intended use align efficiently, each aspect reinforcing others. Production method generating forms well suited to anticipated applications. The cognitive requirements for blade production include geometric reasoning, understanding how three-dimensional core form determines two-dimensional platform relationships and one-dimensional blade removal vectors. Spatial thinking that visualizes blade hidden within core before removal. Planning ability that guides core preparation toward form, enabling systematic blade production. Manual dexterity, executing precise strikes, repeatedly achieving consistent results, and overarching systematic thinking that organizes entire production sequence from raw material selection through core preparation, through blade removal, through final tool manufacture into coherent system. Organizational capacity showing sophisticated technical cognition that goes beyond simple tool making into systematic production planning. Approach that represents significant step toward organized manufacture and eventually all industrial production. Blade technology embodying principles of prepared production, standardized blanks, systematic exploitation, efficient material use, principles that reappear throughout subsequent technological history as humans develop increasingly sophisticated production systems. The effort investment required to master blade technology extends beyond simple percussion flaking. Core preparation demands advanced percussion skills. Blade removal requires learning new striking techniques, different from flake production. Platform maintenance adds complexity. Entire system must be understood as integrated process rather than collection of separate techniques. Comprehension, developing through extended practice, and ideally teaching from experienced blade makers who can explain non-obvious aspects like platform angle requirements and force vector directions, knowledge that might take 3 to 5 years of regular practice to internalize adequately, longer learning curve than basic percussion flaking, but justified by improved efficiency and standardized production enabling specialized tool manufacture. The archaeological record shows blade technology appearing first in some regions tens of thousands of years ago, spreading gradually to other areas, never achieving universal adoption but becoming dominant production method in many populations. Geographic and temporal variation suggesting that blade technology represents optional innovation, advantageous but not essential, populations without blade technology surviving successfully using other tool-making approaches, but populations adopting blade technology gaining efficiency benefits that might provide competitive advantages in tool production. and where blade technology does appear, it often associates with increasingly diverse and specialized toolkits, proliferation of distinct tool types, each optimized for particular function, technological elaboration suggesting that blade production's efficiency and standardization enabled experimentation and innovation in tool forms, making blade technology not just production method, but enabler of technological diversification, foundation, supporting expansion of tool types and functions that characterizes later human cultural evolution, showing again how incremental technical innovations create conditions enabling further innovation. Technological changes building on previous changes, creating accelerating complexity, dynamic, that eventually produces the spectacular technological elaboration, distinguishing human material culture from simpler tool traditions of other species or earlier human ancestors. And blade technology represents an important step in this progression, systematic production method, embodying principles that enabled subsequent technological advances. The recursive dimension of tool making, where tools are employed to manufacture other tools, represents profound innovation, creating self-reinforcing technological advancement, because tools enabling better tool production initiate cascade, where improvements in tool-making capability lead to improved tools, which enable further improvements in tool-making capability. Positive feedback loop that drives accelerating technological complexity, distinguishing human material culture, and recognizing this recursive potential requires cognitive sophistication. Understanding that effort invested in creating specialized tool-making tools pays dividends through improved efficiency and quality in subsequent tool production. Indirect relationship between means and ends, demanding abstract thinking about process improvement rather than just immediate product manufacture. The abraders represent simple but crucial tool-making tools. Pieces of sandstone or other abrasive rock used to grind and shape striking platforms on cores. Preparation work that improves subsequent flaking success by creating proper platform angles and removing irregularities that might cause striking problems. And while abrading platforms seems minor detail, its impact on flaking efficiency and success rates proves significant. Properly abraded platforms accepting strikes more reliably and producing cleaner, more controlled flake removals. And the abrader itself is simple tool, often just naturally occurring. Abrasive rock selected for appropriate coarseness and held in hand while rubbing against stone surface. Minimal tool requiring minimal manufacture, yet its contribution to improving overall tool-making process demonstrates that even simple auxiliary tools can substantially enhance primary production. The indirect percussion represents more complex tool-making tool application, technique employing punch, typically antler or bone rod, positioned against core's platform, while hammerstone strikes punch's back end, impact transmitting through punch to core producing blade removal, and this intermediate tool insertion provides several advantages over direct percussion. Where hammer strikes core directly, punch allows more precise placement of force because punch tip can be positioned exactly on desired striking point and held steady while hammer blow is prepared and delivered, reducing striking errors and improving blade removal success rate. And punch also changes impact characteristics. Elongated punch transmitting force somewhat differently than direct hammer contact, effect similar to soft hammer percussion, but with additional control advantages, particularly useful for blade production where precise force delivery determines success. The punch technique requires coordination between two tools, positioning punch properly, while simultaneously preparing and executing hammer strike, motor control challenge that demands practice to master, but once learned enables blade production efficiency exceeding what direct percussion achieves. Archaeological evidence showing that populations using punch technique often produced longer, more regular blades than populations using direct percussion, quality improvement demonstrating technique's advantages, and learning to use punch effectively probably requires several months of practice beyond basic percussion competence, additional investment that makes sense because improved blade quality and production efficiency justify learning time. The pressure flaking tools themselves represent tool-making tools, specialized implements designed specifically for removing tiny flakes during final tool finishing. And while simple antler tine or bone point serves basic pressure flaking, more refined pressure tools can be manufactured with carefully shaped tips optimized for particular pressure flaking applications. Some tips broad and rounded for removing wider flakes, others narrow and sharp for detailed work, some mounted in handles providing better grip and force transmission, others handheld for maximum tactile feedback. Variety of pressure flaking tools showing that even within single technique, specialized equipment enhances performance, and experienced knappers often maintain collection of different pressure tools selected for specific tasks, scraper finishing requiring different tools than projectile point refinement. This tool specialization showing sophisticated understanding that optimal equipment varies with application. Flexible adaptive approach to tool selection, maximizing efficiency and quality across different tool-making contexts. The platform preparation tools extend beyond simple abraders to include specialized implements for removing small flakes that isolate platforms, setting up proper angles for subsequent blade removal or flake detachment. These preparation tools essentially creating the conditions enabling successful primary flaking, supporting role that might seem secondary but proves essential for efficient production, and recognizing need for such preparation tools requires systems thinking about tool-making process, understanding that upstream preparation affects downstream success, that investing time in proper setup improves subsequent execution, process-oriented cognition that distinguishes sophisticated technical thinking from simpler task-focused approaches. The tool maintenance and repair implements represent another category of tool-making tools, specialized equipment for resharpening dulled edges, removing use damage, reconditioning worn tools, extending their useful life through refurbishment rather than replacement. Resource-conserving approach that makes economic sense in world where every tool represents substantial manufacturing investment and raw materials might not always be readily available. And maintenance tools include specialized abraders for grinding edges, fine pressure flakers for removing tiny damaged sections, various implements for removing or replacing hafting components, entire maintenance toolkit showing that tool making doesn't end with initial manufacture, but continues through use. Life as tools require periodic refurbishment, life cycle approach to tools treating them as valuable resources deserving maintenance investment rather than disposable items casually discarded when performance degrades. The recognition that tools can be used to make better tools, that production process itself can be optimized through equipment innovation, represents meta-level thinking about technology where focus shifts from products to production methods, from outcomes to processes, cognitive reorientation that enables technological progress through process improvement, and this process-focused thinking appears uniquely developed in humans, Other tool-using species employ tools to accomplish immediate tasks, but apparently don't create specialized tools whose purpose is improving other tool manufacture, recursive capability that distinguishes human technology and enables cumulative advancement where each generation improves not just tools, but tool-making methods themselves, compounding innovation, where better methods enable better tools, which enable better methods in self-reinforcing cycle. The cascade effect becomes apparent when considering how tool-making tools enable innovations that wouldn't be possible otherwise, pressure flaking tools enabling refined finishing that percussion alone cannot achieve, punch technique allowing blade production exceeding direct percussion capabilities, abriders enabling platform preparation, improving overall flaking success. Each tool-making tool-opening possibilities for improved primary tool production, and as tool-making tools themselves improve, becoming more specialized and refined, they enable further improvements in primary tools, continuing cycle-driving tool quality and diversity progressively higher, technological trajectory visible in archaeological record. As tool types proliferate and quality improves over time, changes reflecting both innovations in primary tools and improvements in tool-making tools and methods. Recursive advancement where progress in production capability enables progress in products which justifies further investment in production capability. Dynamic that eventually leads from simple stone tools through increasingly complex stone tool traditions to eventually working other materials like bone and antler and later metals. Each material domain requiring its own tool-making tools and methods, knowledge and equipment accumulating as technological scope expands. Foundation laid by recognition that tools can make better tools. Principle that once established guides technological evolution indefinitely because no obvious limit exists to how sophisticated production methods and equipment can become. Self-reinforcing progress continuing as long as knowledge transmits between generations and practical problem-solving drives innovation, making tools conceptually simple innovation with profound long-term implications. Enabling open-ended technological elaboration, distinguishing human material culture. The proliferation of distinct tool forms, each optimized for particular function, shows sophisticated understanding that different tasks demand different tool characteristics. That single general-purpose implement serves all functions less effectively than specialized tools designed for specific applications. And this recognition requires abstract thinking about task requirements, analyzing what properties make tools effective for different purposes, then deliberately creating forms embodying those properties. Functional design thinking that represents significant cognitive achievement showing not just technical skill, but analytical capacity, examining relationships between tool form and function, understanding mediated by experience using various tools for various tasks, and noting which characteristics contribute to success. The scraper represents one fundamental tool type, optimized for hide processing, where scraping action removes fat and tissue from skin interior. Motion requiring tool with strong edge that resists dulling under sustained scraping pressure. Relatively steep edge angle providing durability rather than razor sharpness. Comfortable grip area, allowing sustained use without hand fatigue, and typical scraper, shows thick, strong form with steeply angled working edge created through careful flaking, sometimes edge showing, deliberate dulling or blunting, creating almost chisel-like profile that scrapes effectively without cutting through hide, form following function in ways demonstrating clear understanding of hide working requirements, and archaeological sites containing numerous scrapers alongside processed hides or in contexts suggesting hide working activities show that ancient tool makers recognized scrapers as distinct tool category requiring specific form characteristics. The burin represents specialized form designed for grooving bone and antler, creating long, narrow channels that facilitate breaking these tough materials into usable pieces or shaping them into implements. Task requiring tool with strong, narrow point, capable of withstanding considerable force while maintaining precise working edge. And burin construction involves specific flaking technique, creating characteristic chisel-like point through intersection of two flake scars. Robust edge geometry, providing strength while maintaining sharpness needed for effective grooving, form that emerges only through deliberate manufacture, following understood template, not arising accidentally through casual flaking, showing that burins represent intentional design addressing specific functional requirements, and sites showing bone and antler working often contain multiple burins, sometimes with evidence of repeated resharpening, extending their use. Life, practical tools that enabled early humans to exploit bone and antler as tool materials supplementing stone, diversification of material base expanding technological possibilities and reducing dependence on stone alone. The backed blades show yet another specialized form, where one edge is deliberately blunted through steep pressure flaking or simply left as thick unsharpened area, while opposite edge remains sharp, creating knife-like tool with single cutting edge and thick back that can be safely gripped or hafted without risk of cutting. User functional design that recognizes distinction between working edge requiring sharpness and non-working areas where sharpness creates unnecessary hazard, and backed blade form appears widely across archaeological sites in many regions, showing that this functional design principle of combining sharp working edge with safe handling area got discovered independently, multiple times, or spread widely through cultural transmission, either scenario demonstrating design's practical advantages, making its adoption beneficial across varied contexts. The projectile points represent highly specialized tool category optimized for penetration when propelled at high velocity, requiring sharp edges for cutting, streamlined form for reduced air resistance, durable construction, surviving impact forces, proper weight balance, enabling accurate flight, aerodynamic characteristics that distinguish projectile points from other cutting tools, and successful point designs embody sophisticated understanding of ballistics and penetration mechanics, knowledge accumulated through practical experience, launching countless projectiles and noting which designs fly straight and penetrate effectively versus which tumble in flight or fail to penetrate deeply. Experimentation costs measured in lost game and failed hunts, driving refinement toward optimal forms, and archaeological record shows remarkable diversity in projectile point types. Different designs probably representing adaptations to different game species or hunting methods or regional traditions. Variation demonstrating that point manufacture wasn't following single universal template, but rather developing regionally distinctive forms through local innovation and tradition. Cultural diversity in technological solutions, showing that tool making represents not just technical practice, but cultural expression, where different groups develop distinctive approaches reflecting their particular circumstances and knowledge traditions. The awls serve piercing functions, poking holes in hides for sewing or basket making or other applications requiring perforation without cutting, task demanding strong narrow point capable of sustained use under substantial pressure, and awls can be made from stone or increasingly from bone, Material choice reflecting functional requirements where bone's toughness sometimes proves superior to stone's brittleness for sustained piercing work. Practical material selection, showing understanding that different materials serve different functions best. Stone excelling at cutting, while bone excels at piercing and prying. Knowledge enabling appropriate material choices. Maximizing tool performance. The needles represent ultimate refinement of piercing tool concept. Extremely fine points with eyes permitting thread passage. Implement enabling sewn clothing constructed from multiple hide pieces. Technological achievement that requires manufacturing bone or antler implement with eye hole. Tiny perforation that must be drilled or ground with remarkable precision given hand tool limitations, and presence of needles in archaeological sites marks significant technological threshold because sewn clothing provides superior insulation compared to simple wrapped hides, enabling human occupation of extremely cold environments that would otherwise remain uninhabitable. Technological innovation, expanding human geographic range, and adaptive flexibility, showing again how tools don't just make existing activities easier, but enable entirely new capabilities, creating new adaptive possibilities. And needles represent exactly this kind of enabling technology, simple implement with profound consequences for human adaptation and colonization of diverse environments. The tool specialization itself reflects cognitive capacity for categorical thinking, recognizing that tools can be grouped into functional types based on shared task requirements. Mental organization imposing structure on technological knowledge, creating categorical framework that facilitates learning and communication about tools. And this categorical organization probably emerges naturally from practical experience where repeatedly using tools for particular tasks creates mental associations between tool forms and functions. Pattern recognition generating implicit categories that become explicit when communication about tools requires naming different types. Terminology, development, creating shared vocabulary, supporting teaching and discussion of tool-making techniques and applications. Language and thought, reinforcing each other as technical vocabulary enables more precise thinking about technological distinctions and relationships. The standardization within categories shows that tool making followed mental templates, conceptual models of what particular tool types should look like. And these templates got transmitted culturally through teaching and imitation, where novices learned not just how to make tools generally, but how to make specific tool types, matching established forms, cultural transmission, creating technological traditions where particular designs persist across generations and spread geographically as populations interact and exchange knowledge. Conservatism in tool forms, showing that innovation wasn't constant random experimentation, but rather incremental modification of established designs. Evolution, through gradual refinement of forms that worked rather than through constant revolutionary redesign. Practical conservatism that makes technological sense because reliable designs shouldn't be abandoned casually, but rather preserved and refined. Innovation operating through small improvements to proven designs rather than wholesale replacement. Conservative innovation strategy that characterizes much technological evolution where radical breakthroughs remain rare, while steady incremental improvement drives most progress. Pattern visible throughout human technological history, beginning with these specialized stone tools, showing that even earliest technological traditions followed evolution dynamics similar to those operating throughout subsequent technological development. The recognition that materials beyond stone could serve tool-making purposes represents conceptual expansion, acknowledging that different substances offer different properties useful for different applications. and bone and antler emerge as particularly valuable materials, providing toughness and flexibility that stone lacks. Complementary properties, enabling tool types impossible in stone alone, diversification that increases technological repertoire and reduces dependence on single material whose availability varies geographically. Practical advantage making material diversification adaptive strategy, enhancing group self-sufficiency and resilience. The bone and antler working itself requires specialized techniques distinct from stone working, because these organic materials don't fracture conchoidally like stone, but rather must be cut, ground, abraded, carved, or broken along grain structure. Different mechanical properties demanding different manufacturing approaches, and developing bone working expertise represent separate learning investment beyond stone tool making, additional technical knowledge that must be acquired through practice and teaching, expanding overall technological competence, but requiring time and effort that make bone working specialized skill perhaps not universally distributed across all individuals, but concentrated among those willing to invest learning time. The burin emerges as crucial enabling tool for bone working. Its strong, chisel-like point capable of grooving bone's hard, dense surface, creating channels that weaken structure, allowing controlled breaking along desired lines. Technique that transforms bone from material difficult to shape into workable substance, yielding useful implements, and without burins or similar grooving tools, bone working remains extremely challenging because bone's toughness resists simple breaking or cutting, requiring systematic weakening through grooving before pieces can be separated. And the burin's role as tool enabling bone working shows again how tool-making tools expand technological possibilities, specialized implements creating access to new materials that broaden overall technological scope. The bone needle represents perhaps most significant bone tool innovation, fine point with drilled eye permitting sinew or plant fiber threading. Implement enabling sewn clothing constructed from multiple carefully shaped hide pieces. Technological capability with profound implications for human cold climate adaptation. Because sewn garments provide superior insulation compared to simple wrapped hides, fitted construction, eliminating air gaps that cause heat loss, multiple layers creating insulation enhancement, tailored forms allowing freedom of movement while maintaining warmth, advantages that make sewn clothing essential technology for surviving extreme cold environments like Ice Age Europe or Northern Asia. And the needle's presence in archaeological sites correlates with human expansion into coldest regions, suggesting that this simple implement enabled geographic expansion that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Technology creating adaptive capacity rather than just making existing activities easier. Transformative innovation, opening new possibilities for human settlement and resource exploitation. The needle manufacturing requires remarkable precision, because eye must be drilled or ground through bone or antler, creating hole small enough that it doesn't weaken structure excessively, but large enough to accept thread, balance requiring careful execution, and eye creation probably involves rotating pointed stone drill against bone while applying sustained pressure, abrasive action gradually wearing through material, tedious process demanding patience and steady control, time investment that makes each needle valuable implement worthy of careful maintenance and extended use, practical economics where manufacturing difficulty creates value, encouraging conservation and repair rather than casual replacement. The fish hooks represent another crucial bone tool innovation, enabling systematic fishing, supplementing hunting and gathering with aquatic resources, technological diversification that increases overall food security and dietary quality, and fishhook manufacture from bone demonstrates sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles where hook must be strong enough to resist breaking under fish's struggles, but shaped properly to catch in fish's mouth and retain it during retrieval. Functional requirements that lead to characteristic fishhook forms appearing across many archaeological contexts. Convergent design where similar functional demands produce similar solutions independently in different regions. And hooks can be simple gorge-style straight pieces of bone that lodge crosswise in fish's throat when line pulls tight, or more elaborate curved hooks with barbed points preventing fish from escaping. Design sophistication varying, but all embodying understanding of hooking mechanics, knowledge that must be discovered through experimentation and transmitted through teaching, because hook design principles aren't immediately obvious without experience, and presence of hooks in sites near water sources shows that ancient people systematically exploited aquatic resources, fishing technology, expanding subsistence base beyond terrestrial game and plant foods, dietary diversification that improves nutrition and reduces vulnerability to fluctuations in any single resource category. The bone points serve various purposes, from projectile tips to awls to pins. Versatile implement category where bone's properties sometimes prove superior to stone, particularly for applications requiring flexibility or resistance to impact breakage. And bone points can be carved, ground, polished smooth, shaped into forms difficult or impossible in stone. Manufacturing freedom that enables design experimentation and functional optimization, and some bone points show elaborate decoration, incised patterns or carved forms, suggesting that functional implements could also serve aesthetic or symbolic purposes. Tool making merging with artistic expression, creating objects that simultaneously perform practical functions and carry cultural meanings. Sophistication showing that ancient people didn't view tools purely instrumentally, but invested them with significance beyond mere functionality. And this integration of practical and symbolic aspects characterizes much human material culture, continuing through present, where objects often serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Functional tools also expressing identity, status, group membership, aesthetic values, layered meanings that distinguish human artifacts from purely utilitarian implements of other tool-using species. The antler tools exploit materials' unique properties where solid bone forms tines, providing natural pointed implements, while hollow base sections offer different working qualities. Structural diversity within single material, enabling varied applications. And antler's combination of hardness and slight flexibility makes it excellent for percussion tools like soft hammers or pressure flakers, where it delivers controlled force without brittle failure, material properties perfectly suited for tool-making applications, and antler also works well for hafts and handles, where its natural form sometimes provides ready-made grips requiring minimal shaping. Efficient use of materials' inherent properties, reducing manufacturing effort, practical approach that shows sophisticated material understanding, recognizing when natural forms serve purposes adequately without extensive modification, knowing when to invest shaping effort and when to accept material as found, judgment that comes with experience and represents aspect of technological wisdom, understanding not just how to make things, but when effort investment proves worthwhile versus when simpler approaches suffice. Economic thinking about technology, weighing costs against benefits, and choosing appropriate methods for each situation. The bone and antler working expansion beyond stone tools demonstrates cognitive flexibility, adapting tool-making knowledge from one material domain to another, while recognizing that different materials require different techniques, mental agility, that shows abstract understanding of tool-making principles general enough to transfer across materials while maintaining specific enough grasp of material properties to adjust techniques appropriately. And this flexibility represents sophisticated technical cognition, distinguishing human technology from simpler tool use where techniques remain rigidly tied to specific materials or applications. Human toolmakers showing adaptive intelligence that recognizes underlying principles and applies them creatively across varied contexts, capacity that enables technological innovation and elaboration, continuously expanding scope and sophistication of material culture, and bone working represents important stage in this expansion. First major material diversification beyond stone, showing that tool-making knowledge could transfer to new materials, opening possibilities for further diversification that eventually encompasses all materials humans have learned to work, from woods and fibers through metals and ceramics to modern synthetic materials. Progression beginning with recognition that materials beyond stone offer useful properties worth exploiting. Conceptual threshold crossed when ancient people began systematic bone working, innovation that set precedent for all subsequent material diversification throughout technological history. The atlatl represents mechanical advantage application to hunting technology, simple device that profoundly transforms hunting capability through physics principle, amplifying human throwing force, and recognizing that lever arm extending throwing motion increases projectile velocity and range requires understanding mechanical relationships that aren't immediately obvious without experimentation or teaching, knowledge that mechanical systems can multiply force or motion representing abstract principle that once discovered enables countless applications from simple levers through complex machines characterizing later technology, and atlatl embodies this principle in remarkably simple form. Essentially, stick with hook or socket at one end, holding projectile's base while hunter grips opposite end, swinging motion, rotating arm extended by atlatl length, launching projectile from longer arc than unaided throw achieves, increased arc radius, translating to higher velocity at release point, physics relationship that produces dramatic performance improvement. The atlatl's effectiveness shows in range extension from perhaps 30 to 50 feet for unaided spear throwing to 150 feet or more with atlatl assistance, threefold range increase that transforms hunting tactics by allowing strikes from safer distances where game can't detect human presence as easily, reducing risk of injury from dangerous prey, improving success rates by enabling multiple throws before game flees. Advantages that make atlatl valuable hunting tool, justifying its manufacture and skill development required for effective use. The device construction requires surprisingly little effort. Suitable straight branch or carved wooden shaft, providing main lever arm, groove or socket at front end, accepting projectile base. Comfortable grip area at rear end, sometimes carved or wrapped for secure handling, and weight distribution along shaft, affects casting performance with various balancing strategies tried across different cultures and contexts. Experimentation producing regional variation in atlatl design, where different groups develop distinctive forms through local innovation, but all sharing basic mechanical principle of lever arm extension. Convergence on fundamental function, despite variation in specific implementations, showing that mechanical advantage principle got discovered and applied repeatedly, suggesting either that principle is relatively intuitive once throwing mechanics are analyzed carefully, or that knowledge spread widely through cultural transmission, either pathway demonstrating that the innovation proved valuable enough to achieve broad adoption wherever it appeared. The projectile modifications accompany atlatl adoption, Because darts launched by Atlatl differ from hand-thrown spears, typically lighter and longer with modified balance points, optimizing flight characteristics for Atlatl launching specialized projectiles, showing that the tool system includes not just launching device, but also ammunition adapted to its characteristics. Systematic thinking about entire weapon system rather than just individual components. Integration, showing sophisticated technological understanding. Recognizing that optimal performance requires matching all system elements, launcher and projectile designed together as coordinated system rather than independently, and this systems-level thinking represents important cognitive development, showing ability to conceptualize and optimize complex multi-component technologies, mental capacity that becomes increasingly important as technologies grow more complex throughout human history. The skill development for Atlatl use requires considerable practice because launching accurately from extended lever arm demands different motor control than hand throwing. Timing of release becomes critical. Since small errors in release point get magnified by lever length producing large trajectory deviations, body mechanics must be relearned coordinating arm swing with wrist snap and finger release in new patterns, and achieving consistent accuracy probably requires months of regular practice, perhaps 6 months to develop basic competence and year or more for reliable hunting-level performance. Learning investment that parallels tool-making skill development, showing that technological sophistication requires not just manufacturing knowledge, but also use expertise. Complete technological system encompassing both creation and deployment capabilities. And populations adopting Atlatl technology must support both manufacture knowledge, ensuring adequate supply of functional devices, and use training, ensuring individuals can employ them effectively. Dual knowledge requirements that make Atlatl adoption represent cultural commitment rather than simple tool addition. Technological change, requiring social support through teaching and practice opportunities that enable knowledge transmission and skill development across population members. The mechanical advantage principle that Atlatl embodies represents profound intellectual achievement, recognizing that physical arrangements can multiply forces or motions, that geometry and physics interact in ways humans can exploit through deliberate design. Understanding that seems obvious in retrospect once demonstrated, but requires remarkable insight to discover initially without prior examples, and whether Atlatl invention happened once and spread or occurred independently, multiple times remains debated, but either scenario shows that the innovation proved valuable enough to persist and spread. Technological success that demonstrates practical benefits outweighing learning and manufacturing costs. Economic calculation that must favor adoption or technology wouldn't persist. And Atlatl's widespread occurrence across Americas, Australia, Europe at various times suggests broad appeal and robust advantages, making adoption worthwhile across varied ecological and cultural contexts. Success pattern indicating that mechanical advantage principles application to hunting provided genuine improvement worth the investment required to integrate it into technological repertoire. The psychological and social effects of improved hunting capability shouldn't be underestimated because hunting success affects group nutrition, influences social relationships where successful hunters gain status and influence, shapes confidence and risk-taking behaviors where effective tools reduce fear, enabling bolder approaches to dangerous game or challenging situations. And these social and psychological dimensions of technology mean that tool innovations carry consequences beyond immediate functional improvements, affecting social organization and individual psychology in ways that feed back to influence technological evolution through changing what innovations get valued and adopted, complex interactions between technology and society. making technological change fundamentally social process rather than purely technical development, and Atlatl represents example where relatively simple mechanical innovation cascades through multiple domains affecting ecology through changed hunting patterns, social structure through altered hunting success distributions, psychology through increased confidence and capability feelings, demonstrating that even simple technologies embedded in human societies generate effects extending far beyond their immediate mechanical functions. Holistic impact, characteristic of human technology where tools aren't isolated objects, but rather integrated elements of complex adaptive systems encompassing ecological, social, psychological, and cultural dimensions. And understanding this systemic nature of human technology helps explain why technological evolution proves so powerful in shaping human adaptation, and why humans alone among species have developed such elaborate material cultures, because human technology operates within rich social and cultural matrices that enable cumulative improvement and broad dissemination, creating positive feedback loops, driving continuous elaboration and increasing sophistication. The transmission of tool-making knowledge across generations represents an essential process without which accumulated technical understanding would die with each practitioner rather than building over time. And cultural transmission distinguishes human technology from simpler tool use observed in other species, where each individual must discover tool techniques largely independently because teaching remains limited or absent. Contrast showing that human technological sophistication depends critically on social learning systems, enabling knowledge flow from experienced to novice practitioners, from older to younger generations, between populations through contact and exchange, transmission networks that create shared technological traditions persisting across centuries or millennia, far longer than any individual lifetime, cultural continuity that makes cumulative technological evolution possible because each generation can begin where previous generation ended, rather than starting from basic principles, building on inherited knowledge rather than rediscovering it independently. The teaching process for tool making involves multiple components working together, where demonstration shows novice what successful technique looks like. Expert napper working stone while student observes, visual learning that conveys general approach and final product characteristics but cannot fully communicate subtle aspects of technique like force levels or hand positions or timing, limitations that require verbal instruction, supplementing demonstration, experienced teacher explaining invisible principles that visual observation alone doesn't reveal, describing how to judge striking angles, when to apply force, where to position hands, how to read stone surface for platforms and ridges, explicit knowledge articulated in words, making visible the cognitive processes guiding skilled performance, communication that requires language capable of expressing abstract concepts about spatial relationships, force dynamics, material properties, technical vocabulary emerging to facilitate precise discussion of tool-making details. The guided practice follows demonstration and instruction, where novice attempts technique under expert supervision, teacher watching students' efforts and providing feedback, correcting errors that novice cannot identify independently because inexperienced practitioners don't yet know what proper technique feels like, or how to recognize when execution deviates from optimal approach, external feedback from teacher, substituting for internal calibration that develops only through extensive experience, and this corrective feedback proves crucial for efficient learning, because without it, novice might persist in ineffective techniques, developing bad habits that become increasingly difficult to correct, as motor patterns solidify through repetition, early intervention, by knowledgeable teacher preventing development of problematic techniques by correcting errors before they become ingrained. Teaching strategy that accelerates learning and improves ultimate performance level relative to trial and error learning without expert guidance. The error correction requires that teacher understand not just how to perform techniques successfully, but also why particular errors produce poor results. Analytical understanding of techniques' underlying principles, enabling diagnosis of problems and prescription of corrections. Meta-knowledge about technique rather than just direct performance capability. And this meta-knowledge develops through extensive experience and perhaps through teaching itself, where explaining techniques to others forces explicit analysis of procedures that might otherwise remain intuitive and unarticulated, teaching creating deeper understanding as teachers must make explicit the knowledge they possess implicitly, pedagogical effect where teaching enhances teachers' own understanding while obviously benefiting student mutual benefit that encourages knowledge sharing rather than hoarding. The teaching relationship typically extends over months or years rather than brief instruction sessions, because tool-making competence develops gradually through sustained practice and incremental improvement. Learning curve that cannot be rushed, since motor skills, visual pattern recognition, material understanding all require time and repetition to develop adequately. And during this extended learning period, teacher must maintain patience with students' slow progress and repeated errors, social and emotional dimensions of teaching, relationship proving as important as technical information transfer, because motivation and persistence determine whether novice continues practicing through frustrating early stages when progress seems minimal and success elusive. And teachers' encouragement and validation sustain students' commitment to learning process, social support that keeps novice engaged until skills begin developing and intrinsic satisfaction from improving performance starts providing internal motivation. Transition from extrinsic social motivation to intrinsic performance satisfaction, marking maturation as practitioner, where tool-making becomes rewarding in itself rather than just means to social approval. The investment that both teacher and student must make in extended teaching relationship suggests that tool-making knowledge held sufficient value that allocating time and effort to its transmission made economic sense, practical calculation, where benefits of producing capable tool makers outweighed costs of teaching time diverted from other productive activities. And this calculation apparently favored teaching investment across human populations, because tool-making traditions show clear evidence of knowledge transmission, with refinements accumulating across generations, pattern that wouldn't occur if each generation rediscovered techniques independently without building on inherited knowledge. The verbal instruction component distinguishes human teaching from observational learning observed in other species, where demonstrations might occur. But explicit verbal explanation of principles and correction of errors through articulated feedback remains absent or minimal. Language enabling much more efficient knowledge transmission by making explicit the implicit knowledge guiding skilled performance and the technical vocabulary that develops for discussing tool making, terms for different techniques, names for tool types, concepts describing material properties and geometric relationships, creates shared conceptual framework that facilitates discussion and instruction. Linguistic infrastructure supporting technological tradition, just as technological knowledge itself represents achievement, mutual reinforcement between language and technology, where technical activities drive vocabulary development, while expanded vocabulary enables more precise technical thinking and communication. Co-evolution that may have driven both technological and linguistic elaboration throughout human evolution, as increasingly complex technologies required increasingly sophisticated communication systems to support their transmission and elaboration. The geographical spread of particular tool-making techniques and tool types demonstrates that knowledge transmission occurred not just vertically between generations, but also horizontally between populations through contact, trade, migration, or other interactions where groups encountered each other and observed or learned each other's techniques. And this horizontal transmission creates larger networks of knowledge, sharing spanning broader geographic areas and more diverse populations than vertical transmission alone would connect. Expanded transmission networks accelerating innovation by exposing practitioners to varied approaches and techniques from different traditions. Diversity that provides raw material for innovation, as ideas from different sources get combined and modified, creating new techniques or tool types, cultural exchange driving technological creativity through exposure to alternatives, stimulating experimentation and adaptation. The teaching and knowledge transmission infrastructure represents essential foundation for technological evolution, making human material culture qualitatively different from tool use in other species, because without reliable transmission mechanisms enabling knowledge persistence and accumulation across generations, technological sophistication cannot advance beyond what individual discovery within single lifetime achieves. Limit that constrains other tool-using species to relatively simple technologies where each individual must largely discover techniques independently. But human teaching systems enable cumulative evolution where innovations build on previous innovations across many generations, creating potentially unlimited elaboration of technological complexity. And this capacity for cumulative cultural evolution through knowledge transmission makes human technology a unique phenomenon in natural world. Social process, creating adaptation and complexity through cultural inheritance, paralleling but distinct from biological inheritance through genes, dual inheritance system, giving humans extraordinary adaptive flexibility, responding to environmental challenges through both biological evolution operating over millennia and cultural evolution operating over generations or less. Responsiveness that explains human species' remarkable geographic expansion and ecological success, occupying virtually every terrestrial environment from Arctic to tropics. Adaptation range enabled by technological and cultural flexibility that teaching systems support, showing that these seemingly simple social processes of demonstration, instruction, practice, and correction create foundation for human ecological dominance and technological civilization, making teaching itself perhaps most important. Human innovation, meta-technology, that enables all other technologies to develop and persist, and the evidence of teaching visible in archaeological record through patterns of skill development, tool standardization, and regional variation in techniques shows that ancient people invested substantially in knowledge transmission, recognized implicitly or explicitly that teaching represented crucial activity worth supporting, insight that remains valid today as educational systems continue performing this essential function, transmitting accumulated knowledge across generations, maintaining cultural continuity, and enabling continued innovation, building on inherited foundations. The extended timescales required for developing true expertise in tool making reveal knowledge depth and skill complexity embedded in even apparently simple stone tools, because mastery demands not just understanding general principles, but developing intuitive grasp of subtle material variations, refined motor control, executing precise actions reliably, visual pattern recognition reading stones, and predicting fracture behavior, accumulated experience, building mental models of how tools should be made, and extensive repertoire of techniques for various situations. Comprehensive capability package that develops only through sustained practice over years, approaching decade or longer for highest proficiency levels. And this extended learning period shows that ancient toolmaking represented skilled craft, comparable to complex modern technical practices in expertise development requirements. Not simple activity that anyone could master quickly, but rather demanding practice, requiring dedication and sustained investment, specialized knowledge that probably concentrated among relatively few individuals willing to invest the extensive practice time that mastery demanded. The learning progression typically begins with basic percussion flaking, where novice learns to strike stones together, removing simple flakes, initial competence developing during first 6 to 12 months of regular practice, where learner achieves perhaps one successful flake removal in 5 to 10 attempts. Success rate low, but improving from initial period where virtually no attempts succeed. Gradual improvement reflecting motor learning as neural pathways supporting hand-eye coordination develop through repetition. And during this early phase, learner primarily focuses on basic technique mechanics, how to hold stones, where to strike, how much force to apply, fundamental actions that skilled practitioners execute automatically without conscious attention, but that beginners must consciously deliberate over for each attempt. Effortful controlled processing that characterizes early learning before automatization develops through extensive practice. The intermediate phase, spanning second and third years of regular practice, sees success rates improving to perhaps 50 to 70%, while tool quality also increases as learner begins producing implements that function adequately for intended purposes, rather than just occasionally removing flakes successfully. Progress reflecting developing judgment about platform selection, striking angles, force levels, beginning to read stones' surfaces for subtle cues indicating where productive strikes might land, pattern recognition emerging from exposure to hundreds or thousands of examples, building visual experience base that enables increasingly sophisticated assessment. And during this phase, learner also expands technique repertoire beyond basic percussion to include platform preparation, soft hammer techniques, perhaps initial attempts at pressure flaking, breadth of capability growing alongside depth of skill in any particular technique, and the combination of improving success rates, expanding technique repertoire, and developing judgment creates functional competence, where practitioner can produce tools adequate for everyday needs without expert supervision. Self-sufficiency milestone that makes individual capable toolmaker, though still far from mastery-level performance. The advanced development phase, extending from 4th through perhaps 10th year or longer, involves refining techniques, achieving higher success rates above 80 or 90%. Developing ability to produce refined, high-quality tools, showing controlled symmetry and efficient material use, mastering specialized techniques like fine pressure flaking for detailed finishing, learning to work various stone types, effectively adjusting approach based on material properties, and perhaps most importantly, developing almost intuitive sense for tool making, where many decisions happen automatically based on pattern recognition and accumulated experience rather than conscious deliberation. Expertise showing in smooth, efficient workflow, where skilled napper seems to work effortlessly, producing refined implements quickly, while novice labors slowly with much wasted effort and uncertain results. performance gap between expert and novice, revealing expertise's true depth, showing that surface-level competence represents only fraction of potential skill level achievable through extended practice. The motor learning underlying skill development involves nervous system changes, as repeated practice creates increasingly efficient neural pathways supporting tool-making movements. Procedural memory, consolidating knowledge into automatic performance, requiring minimal conscious attention. Transitions from slow, deliberate, controlled processing to rapid automatic execution, freeing mental resources for higher-level planning and problem-solving rather than consumed by basic technique mechanics. And these neural changes require time and repetition to develop, cannot be rushed through intensive short-term practice, because neural reorganization happens gradually through repeated activation of relevant circuits over extended periods, biological constraints on learning speed that explain why mastery demands years rather than months. Regardless of practice intensity or motivation level, patience becomes essential virtue for skill development, as learners must accept that expertise develops gradually through sustained effort over time without shortcuts available. The teaching relationship importance increases with expertise level, because while basic techniques might be learned partially through trial and error or observation, advanced techniques often prove too subtle or complex for independent discovery within reasonable time, requiring explicit instruction and guided practice under expert supervision. And the most refined aspects of technique, like reading stone surfaces for optimal striking platforms or judging precisely calibrated force levels for controlled pressure flaking, represent tacit knowledge that experts possess but struggle to articulate fully. Learning requiring not just verbal instruction but extensive practice with feedback, where teacher helps student develop feel for correct execution, embodied knowledge that cannot be fully captured in words but must be acquired through direct physical experience under guidance. And this embodied knowledge component explains why expert toolmakers can demonstrate capabilities they cannot fully explain verbally, knowing how, exceeding knowing that, in domains where physical skill and perceptual discrimination prove central. The skill distribution within populations probably showed substantial variation, with most individuals possessing basic functional competence developed through several years, occasional practice sufficient for producing adequate tools for personal use, while smaller number of individuals who invested more extensive practice time achieved higher expertise levels, producing refined tools and perhaps specializing in tool manufacture as recognized craft role, division of capability reflecting differential interest and practice investment, where some individuals found tool making particularly engaging or rewarding, leading them to invest more time developing greater expertise, while others maintained minimal adequate skills, focusing effort elsewhere. Natural variation in interests and aptitudes, creating expertise distribution found in most skill domains across human societies. And this variation means that finest tools found in archaeological record probably represent work of most skilled practitioners rather than average capability. Masterwork pieces showing what peak performance looked like, while more typical tools reflect more common competence levels. Distinction important for understanding ancient technological capabilities, where archaeological samples probably overrepresent expert work, because refined tools get curated and transported, while crude, expedient tools get discarded where made. Sampling bias that makes finest specimens more archaeologically visible than typical products. And recognizing this bias helps calibrate expectations about ancient capabilities, showing that presence of masterwork pieces demonstrates that some individuals achieved remarkable expertise, but doesn't necessarily mean everyone possessed equivalent skills. Social differentiation in expertise, representing normal pattern where skills concentrate among those most invested in developing them. The decade-plus timeline for achieving mastery shows that tool-making represented serious craft requiring dedication, comparable to modern skilled trades or artistic practices, where expertise develops through sustained engagement over substantial portion of working life. Recognition that should dispel any lingering notions of stone tools as simple, primitive objects anyone could make casually. Reality being that even basic stone tools embody considerable knowledge and skill, while finest examples represent true mastery requiring lifetime dedication to achieve, and this expertise requirement makes tool-making traditions important cultural institutions where knowledge must be actively transmitted and maintained through teaching systems supporting skill development, without which expertise would be lost, as experienced practitioners age and die, taking their knowledge with them unless they have trained successors, making teaching and learning infrastructure essential for technological continuity, investment that ancient societies apparently made successfully since tool-making traditions persisted across countless generations, maintaining and often improving technological sophistication over time. Cultural achievement demonstrating that ancient people valued and supported knowledge transmission, enabling cumulative technological evolution that eventually transformed simple flaked stones into foundation for all subsequent human technology. The technological trajectory from earliest stone tools through increasingly sophisticated implements to eventually all human technology shows cumulative evolution, where each innovation builds on previous advances, small improvements accumulating across generations, creating eventually dramatic differences between simple beginnings and complex endpoints. And understanding this progression reveals that modern technological civilization didn't emerge suddenly through revolutionary breakthroughs, but rather developed gradually through patient accumulation of incremental innovations, each contributing modest advance that, combined with countless other advances, produces spectacular overall progress. And this cumulative evolution depends fundamentally on cultural transmission systems, enabling each generation to inherit previous generations' knowledge and add its own discoveries rather than starting anew. Social learning infrastructure creating technological ratchet that prevents backsliding, allowing only forward progress as innovations once made persist and spread and get refined. And tool-making represents foundation for this cumulative evolution, earliest technology, establishing both practical capabilities that enabled survival and adaptation, and also cognitive frameworks and social practices supporting technological innovation and transmission, foundation that made all subsequent technological development possible. The cognitive requirements for sophisticated tool making, forward planning that envisions tools before manufacturing them, hierarchical thinking, organizing multi-stage production sequences, causal reasoning connecting actions to outcomes, understanding how technique variations affect results, spatial reasoning, visualizing three-dimensional forms and fracture patterns, abstract thinking, recognizing general principles applicable across specific instances, all represent mental capabilities that serve not just tool making, but all complex human activities, from coordinated hunting to social organization to symbolic expression to language. And developing these cognitive capacities through tool-making practice and teaching may have contributed to their elaboration and refinement. Technology serving as cognitive training ground, exercising mental abilities that then became available for other applications. Co-evolution between technological and cognitive capabilities where each advances the other, creating positive feedback, driving both toward increasing sophistication. The social dimensions of tool making, including teaching systems, transmitting knowledge, trade networks, distributing raw materials, specialization concentrating expertise among dedicated practitioners, all represent social complexity that goes beyond individual tool use observed in other species. And this social infrastructure surrounding tool-making creates framework for broader social elaboration, organizational principles, and collaborative practices developed for supporting technology transfer to other domains, enabling increasingly complex social structures. Technology and society co-evolving as each enables advances in the other. And the earliest tool-making traditions established this pattern where technology required social support, while social complexity enabled technological advance, mutual reinforcement that continues throughout human history as societies and technologies grow increasingly complex together. Interdependence that makes human adaptation fundamentally socio-technological phenomenon where social organization and technological capability must be understood together rather than separately. Integrated system where changes in one domain drive changes in other, creating holistic evolution of human cultural capabilities. The material consequences of tool making transformed human ecological niche by enabling capabilities impossible without tools, effective hunting of large game requiring stone-tipped spears or atlatl-launched projectiles, efficient butchering depending on sharp stone flakes for cutting through tough hides and separating meat from bone, hide processing using specialized scrapers preparing skins for clothing and shelter, plant processing employing various cutting and grinding tools, all subsistence activities enhanced or enabled by appropriate tools, technological mediation of human-environment interactions, making tools essential rather than optional for human survival. Profound dependence distinguishing humans from other species where tools remain useful but not essential. And this dependence means human adaptation operates primarily through cultural technological evolution, responding to environmental challenges by inventing new tools or techniques, rather than waiting for biological evolution to produce anatomical changes. Rapid, flexible adaptation, enabling human geographic expansion into diverse environments from tropics to Arctic, technological plasticity, providing adaptive capacity unavailable through biological evolution alone. The elaboration pathway from simple tools through increasingly complex implements shows no obvious endpoint. Blade technology, enabling standardized production that facilitates specialization. Composite tools, demonstrating that different materials can combine leveraging each substance's strengths. Heat treatment showing that materials can be modified, improving properties. Recursive tool making where tools make better tools, creating self-reinforcing improvement. Specialization producing diverse tool types optimized for specific functions. All innovations, opening possibilities for further innovations. Each advance revealing new potential that stimulates additional experimentation and discovery. Open-ended elaboration, limited only by imagination and knowledge rather than hitting natural limits. And this unlimited potential for continued technological development distinguishes human technology from simpler tool traditions that reach plateaus beyond which little further advance occurs. Human technology instead showing continuous elaboration extending from earliest stone tools through present day with no sign of approaching limits. dynamic that makes human technology unique phenomenon with capacity for indefinite continued evolution, and understanding that this unlimited potential emerged from earliest tool-making traditions shows that seeds of all subsequent technological development existed already in stone tool manufacture, principles and practices established there, continuing throughout all later technological history as foundation that remains relevant even for most advanced modern technologies, still embodying basic principles of functional design, systematic production, specialized tools, social learning, incremental improvement through experience, timeless principles first manifested in stone tool making, continuing to guide technological innovation today. The achievement that tool-making represents, transforming simple observation that certain stones fracture predictably into sophisticated technological tradition, encompassing detailed material science, understanding various rock properties, refined techniques like pressure flaking requiring years to master, composite construction, combining multiple materials through adhesive technology, demanding thermal control knowledge, specialized tools optimized for particular functions, showing functional design thinking, recursive improvement, where tools make better tools, creating accelerating advancement, and comprehensive teaching systems, transmitting complex knowledge across generations, enabling cumulative evolution, shows profound sophistication embedded in what might appear superficially as primitive stone tools, but examining them closely reveals remarkable accumulated knowledge and refined technical capability, representing hundreds of thousands of years of discovery and innovation compressed into final forms, where every flake scar tells story of technique development, every refined edge demonstrates mastery achieved through years' practice. Every composite tool embodies multiple knowledge domains from material properties to thermal processing to mechanical assembly, sophistication that deserves recognition and respect as significant human achievement, foundation that made all subsequent technological development possible by establishing both practical capabilities and cognitive frameworks and social practices that enabled continued technological evolution and modern technological civilization, built ultimately on this foundation of stone tool-making traditions that first demonstrated human capacity for cumulative cultural evolution, creating capabilities exceeding what biological evolution alone could produce, making tool-making not just earliest human technology, but most important innovation in human history, enabling everything that followed.